Well, hi everyone. Please feel free to come in. Don't hold back. So thanks for coming to the artist conversation for the Camera Unrepair Shop, which is my latest experimental fun / art / work. And before I start, I just want to acknowledge I'm on the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. I grew up on the lands of Whadjuk Noongar people and on the coastal Salish. And I'm really pleased to be able to talk to you today about this show and to thank Photo Access for supporting crazy people like me who propose these kinds of ideas. And the reason it's slightly a crazy idea is because it's an experiment. It's designed to be sort of an installation but also a performance, so that at various times throughout the show I will be sitting here working and taking apart unrepairing cameras. These are the cameras that are subject to the experiment, and they're not all going to be taken apart, but as you can see, there are some gaps in the shelving there. They've already made their way to the other side of the room. And so the idea of the show is to basically interrogate several threads around both photography and mass production, mass consumption, and also to acknowledge photographic histories and how important they've been to our lives. And also, I suppose, acknowledge in a kind of unusual way, perhaps, the relationship between performance and photography, because traditionally, my understanding of performance and its relation to photography is that photography is often the sort of documentation that proves the performance took place, and that it's it's kind of more of a sort of technology and tool of performance rather than the subject of the performance. So I wanted to turn that on its head a little and make photography the performance. But there's also a nice relationship between performance and the idea of work, because often we think about work and perform. To perform is another way of thinking about work. And so how do we work in our daily lives? And so the origins of this work is really coming out of a visit I did to Detroit, the Ford factory several years ago, and the River Rouge factory, which is where they make the F-100 and various other iconic Ford vehicles. It's the original sort of early Ford factory that kicked things all off, and which was represented by Diego Rivera, and my colleague, Dr. Vari Mackenzie's written a really nice essay for the catalogue over there if you want to read a little more about it. But basically, I went to visit the Ford factory out of an interest in understanding how these places work. I've never been to a factory, and I was really struck by the fact that you could watch the workers working, and that was part of the experience of being a tourist in the factory. And so I was really kind of blown away by that, to the extent that I sort of started to think, well, what are we looking at here? When does this work become a performance, a tourist experience? When does one overtake the other, or can they exist side by side? How are we looking at a performance? Are we looking at the making of a car? So these kinds of relationships were really fascinated me, and I thought that maybe I would try and disassemble. I'm not particularly interested in, well, I am interested in making, but I'm interested in making through unmaking, I guess. And for me, the camera is such an iconic and wonderful thing, and I think for many of us who've been alive during the 21st century, you can see how it's sort of shaped the way we have experienced life, but also, I guess, also our memories. And so for me, I wanted to kind of focus on how could I sort of get to know the camera better and make the camera the subject of the inquiry. So I kind of decided to do a disassembly of the camera as a kind of reverse production line, and that's why you kind of go in a reverse fashion around the space, from the camera to the working prints to the disassembled camera, and then to the final portrait. So my intention is to basically get to know the camera, explore some ideas about how I might represent the camera, and that's what the cyanotypes are. But they're also obviously referencing the blueprint as a process of design, but also as a, I guess, a way of thinking through. And as a collection of prints, they're also, I think, for me, aside from ideas in progress, they're also as a collection representing the process that goes into art making, and the fact that, you know, all of that is often behind the scenes or under the artwork that eventually makes its way to the wall or wherever. And so these ideas then kind of help me to make some decisions about how I can represent each camera, and I guess as a portrait. And so I thought it would be really fun to try and make the camera the subject of the portrait without using the camera as a device for making the portrait, other than being the subject of the portrait. So so that's what I've done, and I've used the pure sort of fundamentals of photography in doing so, you know, light, emulsion, paper, basically, but in different ways. And obviously with the photogram technique, which is what you have over here, this is the very sort of precise kind of imagery you can get, and that's done in the darkroom. This is the more sort of abstract. It's more dependent on the vagaries of sun and cloud. This is done outside. These are cyanotypes that, you know, there's been a cloudy day sometimes, and I really like the contrast between the kind of spontaneity and unexpectedness of what might appear when you do a cyanotype. Not that you can't have great control with a cyanotype, but that's not what I'm using it for in this show. But that contrast for me, the fleetingness and the sort of ideas and the dynamism that this is intended to reflect, contrasts with the precision and the sort of final decision making that often goes into any kind of portraiture, but in this case, the portrait of a camera. Yeah, I could probably go on quite a bit, but I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has anything they want to comment on or ask questions. But one of the things I've experienced.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How does your background influence?
Actually, I forgot to mention that. Some of you who may know me, I have a background in archaeology. Okay, so wanting to understand the camera, and in archaeology, you know, we excavate, we destroy in the process of creating knowledge about something, and so we excavate the ground, we pull together the fragments to better understand what it is we're looking at, what it is, the period of time that refers to. So that's very much, you know, what's going on here as well. It's my desire to understand not only the camera better, the time in which it was made, where it was made, the resources. Now that's a really big point. If you just look at the cameras on the shelves back there, you can see the complexity that's embedded in this little box, which you know, the diversity and the change over time. So, you know, there is a digital camera on there. I took my first digital camera apart last week, and it was a very different experience. But you do see the sort of change in resources, the change in the technology. And so as someone who comes from an archaeological background, I think you can see that there is an interest in trying to understand by looking at the fragments, looking at the parts, and sort of rethinking about how those parts might go together to tell the story of the camera. There's also, with cameras, of course, there are stories. The camera is not only do photographs, of course, bring back memories, but the cameras themselves are great at eliciting moments. And I guess that's another thing about the relationship with performance, because no performance is the same, and I guess the performance, the sense that a performance brings when you're in it is that you're in the moment, and there's a nice analogy there between photography and how it captures moments and how it takes us back to those moments when we think about or look at a photograph. We can sort of almost teleport. Not every photograph, obviously, and especially not necessarily if it's not a physical object as a photograph, for me anyway. But what I've learned from doing this show so far is the really strong relationship that people have to specific cameras, and that those devices can actually elicit a whole series of memories as well, which I wasn't expecting. When I was contemplating how to undertake this, I had thought that I could be a little bit like one of those River Rouge plant workers and have my headphones on. I obviously have my uniform, which I put on every time I come in, and I do get plenty of coffee breaks, so don't worry, I'm not overworked. But yeah, a lot of them wear headphones. A lot of them are, I guess listening to their music, just sort of doing that repetitive work. And I thought about that with this work, but I'm really glad I didn't, because then people want to have conversations about their cameras to me, and I'm just sitting there. They're interested in what's going on in the insides, but it also seems to bring alive a lot of reflections on their lives through the camera. So that's been a really fun, unanticipated aspect. And as I said, this whole show is kind of intended to just be a little bit unanticipated. So it's not a sort of very controlled performance in the way that proper live art performance artists would.
Can I just ask you, is there a chronological logic to the way you're approaching each camera? Are you going backwards to forwards, or are you just how do you choose the camera to unrepair, disassemble?
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't gone in any particular chronological order. In fact, I've just kind of been drawn to whichever one I felt like on the day. Like the other day, I started to take apart one like this, and it's going to be the series of the next thing, so it's not on the shelf yet. But it's a very kind of classic sort of first camera for people in the 60s, 70s, 80s, possibly. And so it's kind of driven by my own mood, partially, but also I have to admit, there was a point where I had to psych myself up to the idea of destroying through the act of wanting to know and understand, because I'm not repairing in the traditional sense, I'm remaking them in a new way. But so there is that. There's also the challenge of some of them are quite seamless, particularly the plastic cheaper ones, and I really don't want to break as much. I mean, it's, it sounds kind of crazy. I don't want to break the camera in breaking it open, and so I'm trying not to damage it and do it very carefully. But some of them are, it's like they're just molded in plastic almost. So I often do look for screws as an entry point into the camera. These ones are especially good at that. And so there isn't, and someone suggested the other day that they were going to bring in a brownie for me to take apart, and I said sure. But it looks like there's not a very easy way to get in. So anyway, so that's just, these are things I quite like being confronted by what's happening then and there. Like if the materials throw up a different challenge, then I like that I like the materials to be a part of my creative practice, and whatever they bring to the party is part of what evolves as the work. And whether that be the sun and the cyanotype on a given day, or the camera. And I'm only going as far as I can go. I do have a hammer, but I really only use it to pry my way in. I really don't smash anything. That's kind of one of my key performance criteria goals.
And these are your tools here?
These are my tools. This is my dad's toolbox. This is an homage to him. But yes, they are my tools. There's only a few that I really need so far, as I said. One of the fun things I like to imagine when I'm doing ones like this, you know, like I'm in a James Bond movie.
Yeah.
It's like, the red wire, is it the red wire, is it the blue wire? Because those are all sort of, you know, it's all kind of compact, and you have to cut a couple of them to pull it all apart. So I kind of, you know, takes you on it's a lot of fun, you know. So who can resist having fun?
Your compositions, are they related to your art, your background in archaeology, or?
Oh, you should ask two of the archaeologists in the room, I suspect, for that. But
there's a
from
familiar aesthetic, I can say.
Or is it?
For some things.
Are you archiving as you pull it apart, or?
That's an interesting question you should ask, because so with these I have tried different approaches, and I guess each camera lends itself to me to, like the digital, I really felt this more kind of like cataloging it or kind of arranging it, whereas this one is a bit more chaotic, and that, you know, my hands in there are kind of reflecting that idea of being in the middle of it. But
is that designed chaos, or did you throw it on the table?
no, I didn't throw it. I threw some of it on the table, but no, I didn't throw that on the table.
If you were classifying those within the framework of archaeology, what classifications do they fit into?
Well, there's a variety of things you could do. You could go by the sort of the shape and the size. You could look at the materials. You could look at the function. So like, I have actually tried to make an inventory as I go, and to also record how long it takes me to do a camera. Generally speaking, an hour and a half per camera is what I've found so far, not including notes or anything. But you know, some of them have things, and there's things that I was talking to someone this morning. I don't know what to call this gizmo. Like, there's 10 million screws in here. Yes, I can call them screws. But so in my inventory, you know, it's just like, for me, really, like I feel like I'm doing something to understand this. I don't know what this piece of squiggly metal is called. So, but it kind of takes me back to this idea that somehow these were assembled. Someone knew what this was. Many of them are, like, you can see hand marks inside, like someone's, you know, with a, you know, or hand soldered. So not all of it's,
Nice
you know,
to get their DNA, wouldn't it?
robots, but you know, so yeah, so I like being kind of reminded of, and again, this sort of relationship with labor, I think, goes back to the artist again too. There's a lot of affective labor that goes into art practice that we don't see, you know, until we get to the show, there's a whole lot that's sort of behind the scenes. And I guess with the camera, trying to understand its complexity, for me, that's also kind of like a metaphor for understanding the whole process.
And do you see any performative element in collecting?
In collecting the cameras,
Yeah.
hoarding, I guess. My partner is not here, probably because of that. But Elisa, you had a question?
Oh yeah, I was just wondering, like, did you, in like the disassembling, are there any elements of like complexity in the innards or even simplicity that surprised you? Not as an archaeologist, but as a photographer, because we're so much kind of enslaved to the image at the end of the photographic process. That's what lots of artists think about, rather than the kind of mechanized, like little tentacles of the device. Is there anything in the actual apparatus that's made you rethink your relationship with the camera?
That's a really good question. And I think it's ongoing actually, because each time it's different, and I like that about it. There are patterns obviously that emerge, but yeah, I guess there's this amazing simplicity to look at, but complexity when you actually disassemble it, just in the winding of the camera, which I had like seeing all these tiny cogs work together just to wind the film on was like, you see that when you open the top plate that disguises that, you can see all the little cogs. Like this camera here, these are the cogs that all work together just to allow the film to wind on. And so anyone who's taken photographs with film will know when like the camera can jam, or you know, you've reached the end of the film, and then you've got to wind it on, and all these kinds of really fundamental aspects to making sure the final image comes out. Because if you stuff that up, then, or if it stuffs up, then obviously. So I guess it's mostly about the kind of frailty and the tension within the apparatus that can go wrong, that is I'm reminded of as I'm doing that, which reminds you of the kind of film photography magic and preciousness, and kind of, you know, like a friend of mine came in the other day, and when I decided to do the controversial, my partner would say, taking apart this type, right, which was her first camera. So she, but my other friend said, oh my God, that was my first camera, blah, blah, blah. I was really interested in seeing what it looked like on the inside. And I can't remember where I was going with that, but, oh, that's right. She said, oh, you only had, you know, you had, when it had its cube on it, its flash cube, you could only take 4 photos. So you really had to think, you know, and I know that sounds like I'm, you know, old, you know, old school crony, like, oh, you really have to think, you know, you can't just snap away with you. But there is, I mean, and this is why, you know, I think that concept of the moment, being in the moment, capturing time, all of these kind of weird things, you know, I mean, there are millions of people that come through this wonderful institution each time I'm in here getting rolls of film put in, and I'm just shocked at how, you know, so there's something there that, this is a really long answer, Elisa, sorry, but I guess something about that relationship between impermanence and recording time and space in that being in that moment, but the possibility that, you know, you don't know if it's worked until there's that appreciation that happens when I'm looking at this, brings me back to that whole appreciation of photography there, rather than just checking on my phone if it worked. And I guess probably more than that, I think will come at the end of the show when I can sort of reflect a little bit more on how, understanding the apparatus, as you mentioned, shapes the way I go forward with it. Definitely shapes the way I've approached taking their portraits, and that's what I think. I'm taking the camera's portrait, which is kind of a nice reversal of the relationship between me and the machine. But sorry, Kate?
Yeah, so I guess I'm just wondering, aside from the kind of, sorry, this is where I'm going with the death photographs that you're taking of your unrepaired cameras, what are you going to do with their corpses?
Well, see that one that's kind of in the middle there with the roll of film? So that kind of really inspired me, because I think it's really sculptural, and I thought that, well, first of all, on opening night, a friend of mine, got really excited by all the bits that were coming off and wanted to make jewelry of them. And some of the bits are incredibly stunning, like tiny copper wire rolled into tight little coils, and so I guess they could be repurposed in various ways, but I'm thinking I would like to explore their sculptural possibilities. I'm still thinking about that, but yeah, it's hard to say, because I'm not really a sculptor either, but this is the beautiful thing. I'm not a performance artist either, but here I am.
Well, now you are.
Yeah, so I guess this is the thing about allowing your immersion in something to take you into new ways of exploring creative practice, making through unmaking, and then making again, I guess. So yeah, I would like to explore the possibility of them being sculptural, but I'm just not sure how to do that yet. I'm personally not going to go down the jewelry path, because that's one thing I'm not a jeweler, and I don't intend to go down. But I might donate some to her if she wants to do that. Yeah, so it's not something I'm easily going to throw away, even though that's something that some members of my household might like. Yeah, understandably. You can only have so many dead cameras on your shelf.
Can you?
If you want one, Kate.
I'm interested in, talking about the not having headphones in, listening to music, podcasts, audiobooks, which a lot of us do while we're doing that particular stuff. And so I'm guessing, I may be very wrong, that the sound of dismantling adds to the experience, or becomes the soundtrack for what you're doing. Is it a fair
Absolutely, yeah. Like I said, like you would have noticed before when I wound that camera on, the sounds of photography are so iconic and luscious. Like they're difficult to ignore, I guess, if you love photography, and so that again is not something that I have to admit I anticipated or thought about, that it would be the soundtrack. But so originally I decided to not wear the headphones in order to enable engagement, because I didn't want people to think I was shut off. But absolutely the sounds and the relationship between not just the sound, but the movement of me triggering the sounds, especially with things like certain mechanisms moving them, but also seeing them in a new way, because you don't normally see that. So this morning I was just playing with watching the shutter from the inside. So yeah, definitely the sound of photography, which again is not something we anticipate, other than that iconic element to that people have on their phones even sometimes to emulate traditional photography. But yeah, I think that gets back to the idea that the action of photography creates the moment as much as it is a performance in time and space, and enables us to formulate memories, even if the image doesn't come out sometimes. Not always, but. Any other questions? You're welcome to come in and have a look, pick up cameras, just Yeah, do what, ask specific questions about anything. You can move the sculptures around if you want, whatever. But, yeah, thank you for.
I have no idea for your sculpture.
Oh, do you?